participation of those that are registered for the event. All of that just, is a demonstration of exactly what I was talking about this morning, which is the strategic land power network and the value that these large armies play in the region and their role, their contribution to the security architecture throughout the region. So last comment I'd make is, and right after this I'm going to link up with my good friend Mayor Rick Blangiardi and walk him through here. And I'm just very thankful for the relationship we have with Governor Josh Green, Mayor Blangiardi, really just the whole community here across the state of Hawaii. Very, very appreciative of their help. This forum here, this conference here in Sheraton, and the support that the city and the state provide us is just it's really superb. I'm just thankful to have this opportunity. So with that, I'll look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Jen Jensen with Defense News. You've seen the first two multi-domain task forces take shape and evolve in the Pacific over the last couple of years. Third MDTF, a little bit behind the first, of course.
Yeah.
But in terms of that third MDTF, I think it would be the fourth actual MDTF that would be dedicated to the Pacific. Looking at what the two MDTFs are accomplishing so far and where they're focused, do you have any sense or recommendations you'd like to make on what you'd like to see in terms of the third MDTF for the Pacific, how it would be structured, where it might be dedicated, anything you're looking about?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for going out and visiting in the Philippines and seeing the great work that's going on there. So the third one, or the fourth, that the Army is creating of the five is going to be operating in the Pacific. How we sort of organize 1, 3, and 4, and I'll use those numbers because that's of the five. I guess the first point I'd make is the fact that the Army has made the decision to have 3 that are going to be part of the operating force here in the region. That is a signal of how important, one, that capability is out here. Secondly, the organization and the organizational advantages that it provides. And then third, that force really, as we're learning through this, is going to be an integral force in tying together the joint force at the operational level. And I'm going to expand a little bit on this, Jen, just a bit, because I think one of the stories that's often missed in the transformation or modernization of the U.S. Army through the delivery of new weapons platforms or capabilities, or just like hard power systems, is that the reality of it is the first multi-domain task force, which is, as you just saw, full up and operating, that was actually started in 1920, in 2019 and 2020, I should say, in the year 2019, 2020. And I think the important part of that is it's now 2024. It's been operating, organizing, testing, experimenting, and working through all of its technical, procedural elements of organizing a new formation inside of a theater army as part of a joint force. And the fact that that's 4 years in front of these new systems that are being delivered, that's what I think is really powerful about what the Army's modernization and transformation that's going on. Because if it were the opposite, we would be giving new systems, new platforms, new hardware to a legacy organization, and it would be confused as to how to employ it. So the fact that the organizational change occurred prior to the delivery of what I often refer to as bent metal systems, right? Because it had to go through all of that test, research, development, etc. That to me is a very, very it's a very powerful part of what the Army's doing, but it's often lost because this shiny thing just showed up. And I think that's a very important story to tell, and I think it's a very important part of this period of transformation that the U.S. Army is going through. Tie that to experiments and wargaming, and then actually physically putting those things out into a new environment and new conditions, the conditions and the environment that exist out here in the Indo-Pacific. And I think that to me is one of the most important parts. I'll also, because I have the mic here, I'm going to continue on. So nobody knew back then that we were going to have this conflict going on, this war going on in Europe, and then this other regional conflict going on in the Middle East. So the fact that all of those are happening at the same time that these organizational changes are occurring and these new weapons platforms and systems are coming and landing in those formations, again, I think this is a really important part of where we are in learning from our past, tying concepts to capabilities so that we can create opportunities not just for the Army, but for the Joint Force and for our allies and partners, which is such an important part of what we're doing here this week. Thanks. Hi, Jennifer. Good to see you again.
See you, Chief. Jennifer Ladd from Defense Fund. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what all the U.S. Army is doing in the Philippines. I know you have participated in Balagatan, and there's other things as well. Just what all has been going on there and is going to continue going on there, and the importance of it.
Yeah, so we have exercise Balagatan, but that's the joint exercise. And I'm actually on the front end and back end of Balagatan. There is a Army-to-Army exercise that's called Salakanip. And so why is that important? It's important because that means we can remain partnered for a longer period of time with the Philippine Army, but the Philippine Armed Forces during the joint exercise, Balagatan, but then the Army-to-Army work that is going on between the Philippine Army and the U.S. Army. Why is that important? That's important because the Philippine Army and their armed forces are going through their adjustment of the concepts that they are working on, their concept being one of territorial defense. And so they're referring to it as territorial defense operations, or TDO. And again, that is a military that is 70% Army. And even though they are arranged over 7,500 islands and an archipelago nation, they are also working through how to reorganize, how to retrain, how to modernize, how to upgrade, how to reposition. And I think that what we offer our partners in the Philippines, particularly during the period of time we're in right now, is to learn from the things that we did well and then to avoid the mistakes that we also made. And this is where I think the relationship with the previous Chief of Army, who is now the Chief of Defense, General Bronner, and the current Chief of Army, General Galito, and that's how we're working with them. So I actually think that's a great news story. One other thing that I'll mention while I'm talking here is that I also think something that's missed in all of this is that First Corps and divisions that operate as part, whether it's 25th, 11th, 7th Division, I guess the point I'm making is they're in Cobra Gold for Thailand in February, March, and then they reposition to the Philippines in March, April, into May. Actually, we'll be there all the way through July. And then over that span of time, we'll reposition to Garuda Shield in Indonesia, and then later we'll reposition into Japan for Orient Shield in Yamasakura. And the point here, Jennifer, is exactly what I was talking about this morning. Like, that is tying together joint and Army-to-Army exercises where you're campaigning, because you're tying all these operations and activities in time and space to meet U.S. national security objectives and those of our allies and partners. At the same time, you know, the partner is, and in each one of those places, you know, we're sharing insights from our training centers like JPMRC here in Hawaii and Alaska, and then also the exportable version, which is another thing that is actually going into the Philippines right now, which is JPMRC X, the exportable version. And that's going in and around the vicinity of Fort Magsaysay because the Philippine Army is interested in creating their own combat training center, and we are using our relationship, and they're using their relationship with us, and they're using their experiences through our schooling, and then through their participation in our training centers to try to create their own. And so we're more than happy to help them develop that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ken Kraetzer, CaMMVetsMedia. We cover West Point. Observing the threat, what happened in mid-April, the 300 missiles that Iran shot at Israel that were successfully defended against. How does that reflect? What do you observe on your ability to defend against threats such as North Korea and the Pacific?
Well, we definitely have. The success of that is what I'm going to talk about. The reality of it is there were more than 300, all types, from ballistic to drones, etc. But to my knowledge, almost none got through. Now, there's technical integration, there's positioning that matters. How that translates into what we're doing out here, I mean, I think that threat is one that we recognize. We certainly see it. And then being able to put the right sensor network and the right systems with the right command and control in the right places, and this is what we are working on. I mean, this has obviously been something that's been done in South Korea for a number of years, and then the next layer in Japan for a number of years, and then the next layer out to the second island chain in what I would say like the Guam cluster, because it's not just Guam, it's the Northern Marianas all the way down to Palau. This is an area where we have to have that depth, and this work is all very joint and very combined. So Korea, obviously the ROC Army and the Korean military understand what those assets do and where they are. Same thing in Japan. And then of course our own homeland in the second island chain, because we have to defend and protect there as well, because America's Day starts in Guam and we have to make sure that we're protecting. And I say that deliberately like that because sometimes, you know, often they'll think that, well, Hawaii, where is the furthest west? It's actually not true. It's all the way out to Guam. And we have to remember that positional advantage out there matters as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kevin. Good to see you.
I was going to ask about the Philippines, but that's okay.
You can ask about the ROTC, sir. I'm just kidding. Yes, thanks for being there.
I guess, though, when we talk about, the Philippines or any of these islands chains, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing to overcome the logistical challenges of operating across these spaces and how partnerships play into that to sustain within an archaeological environment?
One of the things, thanks, Kevin. One of the things that I was just mentioning, I was sort of trying to draw out my words, like to visualize the movement into Thailand and then from Thailand to the Philippines to Indonesia to Japan. What's lost in a lot of that is is there's also forces coming from the West Coast, from Hawaii, from Alaska, from Japan and Korea to enter into, with the consent and with the invitation of these host nations that are allowing us to conduct these exercises. So when I say that we're the service without a ride, okay? So we need lift. And when you move the U.S. Army, you actually exercise the logistical and transportation enterprise of the Department of Defense. You do that through TRANSCOM, you do that through DLA, you do that through STDC, you do that through our own sustainment commands and expeditionary commands. We do that through contracting command. So all of these things have to be exercised all the time when you move the Army. And when you move the Army from nation to nation or within the region and then out of CONUS. And I think that, just the activity of creating the logistics backbone that has to happen in each one of these countries to be able to re-aggregate the forces, move by land, move by air, move in the littorals of the countries like we just did in the Philippines by moving down to Palawan and then moving up to the northern edges of Luzon. I mean, it should not be taken for granted what I'm just describing, because that takes a lot of work. That takes 365 days of planning, 24/7, and the extraordinary coordination that has to go on by the joint force to be able to support those activities when we enter into a foreign country. And now we have to work with their customs, their FAA, their FCC, or their equivalent of it. These things are just, we sort of like, hey, we're doing Cobra Gold. Well, actually, just to get to Thailand, or just to get to the Philippines, or just to get to Indonesia, and then have forces converge from the continental United States, from the third island chain of Hawaii and Alaska, from the second island chain, from the Asian continent. I don't take it for granted, but sometimes it's just like, hey, we're just doing this exercise, and you're kind of like, well, how did they get there? Well, it took a lot of work to get there. And getting that force there and re-aggregating that force takes an awful lot of coordination. And to me, that's where the strategic movement of the U.S. military tied to the operational maneuver that actually has to happen in the region. This is an area that it takes constant practice, it takes constant rehearsing, and actually it takes deep coordination and permissions from the countries that we're operating in, which is why this land power network is so darn important to the safety, security, peace, and stability of what's going on out there. Thank you. Hi, Julie.
Could you please talk a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. When I look back to my time 10 years ago, but maybe even just more recently back to 2021, and I'll give you a couple of examples to sort of sink your teeth into. So, Garuda Shield was an army-to-army exercise in Indonesia in 21. In 22, there were 14 nations there. And probably north of 8,000 to 9,000 forces that had converged, of all types, by the way, in 22. In 23, Talisman Sabre, a joint exercise, again, one that was a decade ago, more than a decade ago, just an army-to-army exercise. That's now 15 nations, 30,000 participating, really mainly in Australia, but throughout sort of the near abroad around the Australian continent. And then the last example is we have an Army-to-Army command post exercise called Yamasako with the Japanese. And even this exercise, which is an operational command post exercise, has an Australian division. There are multiple Marine Corps units involved in it. There's the U.S. Army involved in it. And then this year, we're going to have observers from the Philippine Army participate. So I guess there's 3 examples that just a few short years ago were Army-to-Army exercises that have now expanded into multinational exercises, joint and multinational exercises with combined forces. And to me, those are just a few examples of why the multilateral activities and multinational exercises have increased. And candidly, I think they're increasing because they see the value in the teamwork together, and they see the value in the power of being able to share, learn, succeed, fail, develop together. And because it's the last point, the last question, I'm gonna foot stomp this piece again. This region has the largest armies in the world. On average, they're 70 to 75% of each of their countries. So while the map has a lot of blue, and while the global commons of the air and maritime lanes must remain free and open, and we're blessed to have a powerful U.S. Navy and a powerful U.S. Army, or a powerful U.S. Air Force, the region, the landscape of the region, the security architecture of the region is land forces. And that's what's so important about what we're doing here this week, is to bring them together, to create those relationships, build out and improve that architecture, because at the end of the day, that is what, in my view, is going to defend land, protect people, defend territorial integrity, and protect their national sovereignty, and all of that is going to prevent a war from going on. And ultimately, that's the goal, is to stop anything from happening. But we have to do that from a position of strength, and we have to do that from a position of advantage. And that advantage is by being forward and being persistent partners together. So, thanks. No, that was it. That's my closing comment. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great week.